lack of transparency in the negotiating process. The Crown has not carried out consistent or meaningful talks with both First Nations and industry over the years. Industry has been excluded from the most crucial conversations when they concern the transfer of access in a fishery and how that is going to be achieved without harming the industry. Industry must be included in talks as they have had a long dependence on these resources for the success of not only their own businesses, but their community's economic well-being as well. The nation-to-nation negotiation model has not wielded any lasting success when it pertains to integrating First Nations into a fishing industry through a moderate livelihood fishery. Continued exclusion of the fishing industry from these talks will not help to achieve a positive outcome in these discussions. All parties must have their concerns fully vetted to have any chance of a lasting agreement amongst all involved. This process must recognize that there can only be one regulator and one set of rules for all. We cannot entertain any thought of having multiple regulatory regimes. If there are multiple regulators for one fishery, it will only lead to confusion, non-compliance, lack of science, lack of enforcement, etc. It simply will not work. In early September, Nanos Research was commissioned by Maritime and Quebec Fishing Associations to conduct a Canadian public opinion poll asking about how the fisheries should be managed. In early November, Nanos Research was commissioned again to conduct a poll of Canadians, this time by the Globe and Mail and CTV, which included several questions from the earlier poll. One question in particular that was included in both surveys indicated that an overwhelming percentage of Canadians, 75%, believe there should be only one regulator and one set of rules that have been laid out by the government of Canada. Adjacency must be a major component of any discussions pertaining to a moderate livelihood also. First Nations have traditional territories that they have hunted and fished. First Nations cannot simply choose where they want to fish. Traditional grounds, areas, and territories must be established and adhered to by First Nations. Two First Nation bands located in southwest Nova Scotia, namely Acadia First Nation and Bear River First Nations, has expressed major concerns about the infringement on their traditional grounds by outside First Nation bands in Nova Scotia. The adjacency concern must be addressed in order to ensure there is no undue pressure on particular stocks in localized areas. Since 1999, there has been almost $600 million allocated to buy First Nation access into commercial fishery. Today, another process is underway to negotiate a moderate livelihood fishery that will cost the Crown hundreds of millions of additional dollars. Industry believes the Crown has fulfilled its fiduciary responsibility concerning the Marshall decision. The Marshall Initiative, along with other government programs and the ingenuity of First Nations, has created an economic success story within Atlantic Canada First Nations. This success was documented in the recent McDonald-Laurier report, which showed that total on-reserve fishing revenue for Micmac and Maliseet in Nova Scotia provinces grew from $3 million in 1999 to $152 million in 2016. This number is expected to be much higher today. The report evaluated the overall impact of the Marshall decision and highlighted the impressive First Nations fishing fleets, the dramatic increase in Indigenous workers in the sector, and the substantial financial benefits flowing to these communities. It also documented the growth of onshore processing plants and related value-added businesses. Following the 1999 Marshall decision, Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishermen have fished side by side in numerous fisheries. There is no difference between the two parties on the water in a commercial season. Collectively, it is fishermen trying to do their best for their families and their communities. The ultimate goal of any negotiation is to ensure that differences are put aside, but ultimately equality and respect must prevail. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. We'll now go to Mr. Williams for 5 minutes or less, please. Mr. Berry, Mr. Williams? Okay, he's not hearing me for some reason. We'll go to Mr. Clark for 5 minutes or less, please.
Yes, thank you. This is not the first time that I've addressed the Fisheries Standing Committee on this issue. I joined DFO as a fishery officer in July 1979, and I retired in September of 2014. I spent 35 years as a fishery officer, and of those 35 years, 25 as the area chief of enforcement for the Southwest Nova Scotia area of the Scotia Fundy, now Maritimes region. I managed compliance monitoring, conservation and protection, and enforcement through the 1990 Supreme Court FOPO decision on the food, social, and ceremonial rights, and through the September 1999 Supreme Court of Canada Marshall Moderate Livelihood decision, and the Supreme Court subsequent November 1999 clarification. For the sake of full disclosure and transparency, I also want to advise the committee that I now, nor any time in the past, have had any affiliation with any commercial fishery or any organization involving lobsters or any other fishery for that matter. I also have no connection with any political party. I served under 10 Liberal and 7 Conservative DFO ministers, and 3 Liberal and 3 Conservative Prime Ministers. Through my 35-year tenure with DFO enforcement, I have always conducted myself and our CMP programs in a nonpartisan way. Our only objectives being the efficient and productive fisheries management in all fisheries. This included proactive compliance, monitoring, and enforcement to ensure the long-term sustainability of all fisheries for the future benefit of all Canadians. As you are aware, following the Marshall decision, the Fisheries Standing Committee of the day held extensive hearings surrounding the department's implementation of the Marshall decision. During those hearings and discussions, I was interviewed by Mr. Wayne Easter, who was in chair of the Fisheries Standing Committee. The Standing Committee was seeking firsthand knowledge of the fisheries management and the enforcement concerns and problems we were experiencing in the field in southwest Nova Scotia. We identified several key enforcement issues that were having a deleterious effect on our fishery officers' ability to deal effectively and proactively with the increased non-compliance that was occurring during the closed lobster fishing season. We also offered several essential recommendations to enhance conservation through the proper management and enforcement in this fishery. They included effective enforcement was critical to conservation. DFO must rigorously enforce fisheries regulations with impartiality. DFO must have sufficient number of enforcement officers, and that those officers must be provided with the budgets and equipment to do the job safely and effectively. DFO must enforce one set of rules and regulations for everyone, and that it must have the resources and personnel to do the job. Commercial fisheries for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishers must be conducted under one set of rules and regulations, including seasons. The lobster fishery in particular must be managed in such a way to ensure that it is not being conducted, that it is being conducted as a genuine food fishery and not an illegal commercial fishery. There must be an examination of the question on whether the lobster food fishery should be conducted during the same season as the regular commercial fishery. We felt very strongly in 1999 that we had made the appropriate recommendations to the then Fisheries Standing Committee. I feel even more staunchly about them now in 2020. I would also further recommend that the Standing Committee consult with and listen to their fishery officers to confirm that any recommendations from 1999 or now are still appropriate and comprehensive.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
I just have one more sentence. I am a firm believer in the statement that those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In my view, there is no need to try and reinvent the wheel. I would be pleased to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. We'll now go and try for Mr. Williams again for 5 minutes or less, please.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Are you hearing me? Okay.
Yes.
My thanks to the committee and to Jane Baptiste for the opportunity to talk with you today. I appear in my capacity as research director for the Canadian Council of Professional Fish Harvesters, the National Human Resources Sector Council for the fish harvesting industry in Canada. Our members include harvest organizations across Canada with Indigenous representation on both coasts. I will begin by sharing three of the most significant findings from our recently completed national study of labor supply trends in the Canadian harvesting industry. First of all, the fishing industry today is seeing sustainable growth with potential to drive social and economic development in rural coastal communities and First Nations. With improving stock management and conservation, the supply of wild caught seafood is increasingly limited, while global demand is growing almost exponentially. In this situation, seafood product values have nowhere to go but up over the foreseeable future. Our second major finding is that the most serious barrier to continuing industry growth may be labor supply. A third of the current workforce will age out of the industry by 2025, and with shrinking rural populations, we currently have too few new entrants to replace them. As we have already seen in fish processing, critical labor shortages may soon be common on the harvesting side. A third significant finding is that Indigenous employment in the fishery grew by 1,400 individuals from 2001. From 1,400 individuals in 2001 to 3,400 in 2016, an increase of 142%. Indigenous harvesters made up 13% of the total fishing labor force in Nova Scotia in 2016 and 18% in New Brunswick, and those figures will have increased since then. Taking all these factors into account, it's clear that there are real opportunities for First Nations to achieve greater economic and social development through expanded engagement in fisheries. How best to pursue this opportunity? One path is to continue the incremental growth of the past 2 decades and find ways to accelerate it through new collaborations with government and other industry stakeholders, or First Nations may undertake to create new and distinct fisheries with perhaps multiple management systems and licensing regimes, or some combination of the two. Whatever pathways, there will be impact on non-native harvesters and their communities. And I will share with you what I understand to be the predominant views taking shape among the harvester leaders I work with across the Atlantic and Quebec. These leaders understand and acknowledge that 300 years of systemic racism unjustly separated Indigenous peoples from their traditional territories and fisheries, and that racism is evident today in recent violent actions. They recognize the constitutional rights and the simple human rights of Indigenous peoples to have full and fair access to fisheries for food, social, and ceremonial purposes, to earn rewarding livelihoods, and to build self-reliant communities. And they recognize and accept that the moderate livelihood right set out by the Marshall decision is to be negotiated between the Crown and First Nations on a government-to-government basis, and that they are not party to these negotiations. Finally, they share with Indigenous leaders and harvesters a commitment to conserving fish stocks and habitat and to conducting fisheries on a sustainable basis to ensure employment, incomes, and social and cultural well-being for future generations. In my view, these points of emerging consensus provide a constructive basis for dialogue and future collaboration with First Nations fisheries leaders and government agencies on moving forward with the development of Indigenous fisheries. If and when that begins, harvester leaders in the commercial fishery will bring forward certain concerns, as you've heard, about process and implementation steps. Firstly, it is in no one's interest that there be conflict in communities and on the water, with international media attention focused on violent incidents. Harvester leaders deal every day with pressures from their grassroots members who are reacting anxiously to rumors and aggressive posturing by non-Indigenous and Indigenous actors, particularly on social media. There is a critical need for calmer voices to be heard and for leaders in government, First Nations, and commercial fisheries organizations to provide clearer information on policy objectives, pathways, and timetables. Secondly, after a 2-decade struggle to get the fleet separation and owner-operator policies enshrined in legislation and regulations, commercial harvesters hope to see First Nations fisheries develop in ways that help retain fair shares of the wealth of the fishery in the hands of working harvesters and their communities, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Thirdly, non-native fish harvesters need to have a voice and a role in the process. It will help a great deal to relieve current pressures if government establishes a formal consultation table linked to and informing government to government negotiations with First Nations. And as you've heard, the issue of seasons is critical and will have to be dealt with as well. Today, First Nations communities are pushing for their rightful place in the fishery. It may take longer than some may hope, but I believe conditions are taking shape to achieve this. It is an inescapable reality that success will require Indigenous and non-Indigenous harvesters to work together to steward common resources, manage adjacent fisheries, and meet the demands of the same markets. As a practical step in this direction.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We're gone over time, and I have to get to the questioning. Before I get to the questioning round, I just want to let the members know that we'll have the curve off the last half hour for future committee business, namely next meeting and beyond. And I will say that I'm going to have to be very strict on the time allocated for questions and when it ends, because I don't want to punish anybody on the sheet by not getting to them. So we'll start off for 6 minutes or less to Mr. Bragdon. And I will say to the questioners, please, if you can, identify who you would like to answer the question instead of leaving it just hanging out there for someone to volunteer to answer. It makes it much easier and goes much quicker along the way without any hiccups. So, Mr. Bragdon, for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to each of the witnesses for joining us tonight and giving us some very valuable insights through your testimony. We thank you for appearing before this committee and the work that we're doing. I'll start with you, Mr. Clark, and congratulations on many years of service in DFO and over 30 some years, and having been through various administrations. That's a lot of experience you bring to the table and perspective. I noticed you've recently were quoted in the Guardian stating that the minister mishandled the situation. Can you expand on how you think the minister has mishandled it and what you think should be done differently or should have been done differently as we move forward?
I was very concerned that the September 17th comments by the minister, when she indicated that unauthorized fishing during the closed season would not be allowed during negotiations. Now, either she or perhaps the PMO decided that they were going to change that strategy, but that started the chain of events of creating uncertainty, fear, and confusion that, in my view, led to the civil unrest that took place. Now, in no way do I condone civil unrest. I spent 35 years trying to ensure that civil unrest did not take place in the fisheries, and I certainly wouldn't condone it now, but I can understand that the frustration and the terrible communication is what I would call it. I wouldn't call it bad communication. I would have to call it no communication. It appears that the minister and her department, and the Prime Minister's office for that matter, have had terrible public relations and communications around this issue since September the 17th. And that has created and contributed, in my opinion, to the confusion and the frustration that spills over sometimes in civil unrest. I was involved in civil unrest when we had 200 or 300 lobster vessels blockade the Yarmouth ferry at the Yarmouth Wharf. I've had office occupations. I've had protests and demonstrations. I've seen the riot team, RCMP riot squad, marching down Main Street in Yarmouth, beating on their shields, trying to clear protests. So I know what civil unrest can do, and I'm afraid that the minister contributed with her poor communication with helping to create that civil unrest.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. And just one more question to you, and I'm going to also put this to Mr. Barry and Mr. Williams as well. But there's been a lot of talk, and we've heard a lot throughout this committee, throughout the time that this committee's been going on, in regards to the establishment of potentially two separate fishing authorities. And I wanted to get your perspective from an enforcement standpoint, Mr. Clark, and then I'll go to Mr. Barry and Mr. Williams. What is your thoughts or your opinions as to how two separate fishing authorities would work or not? Mr. Clark.
I don't think they have a chance of being successful. I think that the onus is, as the Supreme Court pointed out, not on Indigenous or non-Indigenous fishermen to decide how the fishery is going to be managed. It's up to the Crown and the government to decide. There has to be one authority with one set of rules and regulations for all. I think that was clear in their decision, and it was also clear in the first standing committee recommendations, the 28 recommendations that were produced.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Barry?
Yeah, if I could, I'd just like to expand on Mr. Clark's earlier point about the things that happened this summer and the reason they got out of hand, it just wasn't simply the DFO stopped doing their due diligence this summer. This has been over years, if not decades. It's just slowly and surely pulled back and almost simply abdicated their role and responsibilities of enforcing the rules that's on the books. So this is something that's been building, not just this summer. This has been a long time coming. Listen, the other thing is the minister she or he is the only one that can issue licenses. They're the ones that have to maintain order. And listen, seasons are there for a reason. I hate to use that, but they are for conservation and stuff like it. The minister has the full authority, and only the minister, to issue licenses. Full stop.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Mr. Williams.
I guess my approach to this is focused on the fact that in the medium to long term, we're not going to be able to use fisheries officers and enforcement of rules in a official or in a officials kind of on the water kind of way to solve these problems. The key in the medium to long term is going to be to get agreements among people who working together on the water, to have dialogue and collaboration taking place at the community level. And that's where I think the minister needs to lead this overall exercise in the immediate future.
Thank you. Quick question in regards to, and I'll start with you, Mr. Berry. We've repeatedly,
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon.
Okay, that was it.
Sorry, time
okay.
is up.
All right.
Mr. Morrissey, for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go to Mr. Berry, and you indicated that DFO has abdicated their role for some years now on enforcing fishery regulations in the fishery. Could you briefly elaborate on timeline and how we arrived at where we're at?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the question. But this actually really started to happen right after Marshall, when either, especially the out of season, the FSC fishery was being developed and stuff like that. Even though the FSC fishery pertains to sparrow, in the early 2000s, there was certainly, like there is today, every year licenses had to be negotiated between DFO and First Nations to see how much product was going to be removed that particular summer, for a food, social, and ceremonial. And over time, DFO either negotiated away, like at first they were doing some checks and balances early in the 2000s, and they had a handle on what was being removed and stuff like this. But over time, it just slowly, their input on what was happening, their control on what was happening in the out of season just was slipping through their fingers. Whether this was through negotiation, they were just ceding more responsibility to other folks, and it just wasn't working. And it just kept building and building and building. And actually, I think DFO simply lost control. And like I said, that's why we're here today.
Mr. Berry, there was a period of time when the department's enforcement capability was significantly reduced by the government of the day. Did that have an impact?
Listen, it could have. It could have. But still, you have to make do with what you have. Yes, the number of officers in the field 20 years ago probably was more than today, but you have to adjust. You just can't give up your responsibility of what you're supposed to be doing.
But if you have less people, but if you have less people to do the enforcement, how do you do it? It's difficult to operate a competitive fishery like this under a goodwill principle. I'm going to go, and I'll ask all three probably to comment, because an issue that sort of been, it's at the periphery of this issue. It was discussed generally in some early meetings. Is and I want each one of you to opine on it. Is the what would I call the out of season, not only the out of season, but the unrecorded, undocumented, unregistered cash for product sales in the industry that's been that's been growing. It's been alluded to by a number of witnesses that appeared before this committee. We're told off the record, sometimes on the record, that a big part is what's driving some of the unrest here is the lucrativeness of this industry vis-a-vis as it relates to cash sales. Could you opine?
Okay, I'll start. Listen, you're absolutely right. The reason this activity is growing because it is so lucrative. There's a lot of concerns there. It's just not the cash deals, which is in the millions and millions of dollars.
So you acknowledge that this is happening.
Yes, out of season,
okay.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, look, there's enough lobsters being landed that's not being accounted for that could have a detrimental effect on how biologists and scientists look at how they put their numbers together when they assess the stock, for example.
Would that have a negative impact on our marine sustainability certification that we depend on for sales in our European and U.S. markets? Because our markets depend a lot on being able to document and have validity in those numbers. So if those are not being recorded accurately, it could have a negative impact in our key marketplaces. Would you agree?
Absolutely, it could. It could lead to conditions on our MSC certifications from for a 5-year period and stuff. We don't have it yet, but it could lead to that.
Okay, Mr. Williams, you represent a large credible group. Could you care to give your opinion on my question?
I guess the point I would emphasize there is that there are problems. Our members of our organizations frequently report issues around illegal lobster sales, et cetera, but it's not everywhere and it's not every First Nation. There are a number of First Nations that are worked.
And I just was not referring to First Nations. I was referring to the industry globally.
Where First Nations harvesters are engaged in these illegal activities, it's often sponsored by or at the initiative of non-Indigenous actors in the industry.
Okay.
So on PEI, where you are, I don't think the problem, this kind of problem has reached any scale at all, and there's a high level of collaboration.
Mr. Clark, I'd say I got about 30 seconds left. You've been in the business a long time. How would you answer to the issue of illegal activity?
From what I understand, it has resulted in two things. One is that over the last few years, the number of food fish traps that are authorized have been increasing to what I'm hearing is to a stage when the quantity of traps being issued are reaching commercial quantities. So when you're catching commercial quantities, that increases the incentive to sell commercial quantities illegally. And what happens is not so much the Indigenous fishermen, but the non-Indigenous lobster poachers and the unscrupulous lobster buyers are conducting their illegal activities under the guise of a legitimate food fishery. And the more people that get away with it, the non-compliance is broken down into 3 levels. Some people who would never break the regulation, some people who will always break it, and the 60% in between that will go one way or the other, depending on what the deterrent is. If there is no deterrent, if people aren't getting caught and prosecuted, then those groups are going to go into non-compliance, and that's what has taken place in Southwest Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Has gone way over time. Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to thank the witnesses, Mr. Barr, Williams, and Clark, for being here to testify. First of all, a question for Mr. Clark. It's quite interesting to hear the fishery officer's perspective. You were that for 30 years. That's quite significant. You mentioned earlier the application of regulations the lack of resources, equipment, and budgets. That's a lot of elements, but you seem to suggest that this had an impact on the current situation. So if you have recommendations to make, some demands, what would those be, Mr. Clark?
Not sure I understood your question. Could you repeat it, please?
Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter? Are you hearing the translation? Mr. Chair, can you make sure that Mr. Clark is listening to the translation?
D'accord.
Excuse me, Madam Gill, I've got the time stopped for now. But Mr. Clark, you can select the language that you want to hear it in on the bottom of your screen on the computer. Yes. It may be under translation. Then you can pick either floor. You have to have that set on English if you want to hear it in English, even though Madam Gill will be speaking French.
Yes, it's highlighted in ENG English.
Okay, thank you. Continue, Madam Gill.
Okay. I just wondered if you have 35 years as a fisheries officer. Your testimony enlightened us on the situation. And you mentioned the application of rules. You said there were issues relating to available resources and equipment and budgets for fisheries officers. So this is also relates to what Mr. Barry said earlier. I would just like to know, what recommendations would you make as far as regulations, resources, equipment, and budgets earmarked for fisheries officers to improve these situations? Thank you.
Having trouble with your translation because I can hear your French at the same time that I'm hearing the translation, and they're talking over each other. Perhaps, Chair, you could relay the question to me.
If I can intervene, Madame Gill, est-ce possible que votre...
Madame Gill, Mr. Chair, I can try to ask my question in English, translate it quickly. Maybe this would not be very good for the Bloc Québécois to hear this.
If you're able to understand my accent, I just hear me like translated. That's strange. I'll put it.
I can understand you fine in English.
Yes. You spoke. Yeah, you have 30 years of experience as agent des pêches. I know how to say that in English. And it was pretty interesting what you just spoke about a couple of minutes ago. And you spoke about règlement rules, resources, equipment, and budget, and that you needed you needed more resources for the job of agent des pêches, and I wondered if you could just develop about it, about what would be needed by the MPO, the DFO staff in order to achieve their goal well, and to assure that these kind of situations. I don't know how to say that. Ne s'en venimerait pas, comment on dit ça? would just be maybe help resolving those kind of situations.
Yes, I understand your question very well, and the difficulty that I have is that I haven't been involved directly with DFO and enforcement for 5 or 6 years now, so I'm not sure of the present situation. I was involved in a process at the time called C&P renewal, which introduced another level of supervision into the fishery officer chain of command, and it was working effectively. But I hear because of budget cuts, some of those have now been rolled back, and that I've heard situations in the last couple of years where fishery officers have had to park their vehicles because they had no gas to put in the vehicles. I heard that they had to park their vessels because they had no gas to put in the vessels. I've heard that they had positions that are acting with no incumbents in the position. I think that it has to be looked at again in the terms of what was done with CMP renewal to see how much of this has eroded. I know I worked very closely when Prime Minister Chrétien and Prime Minister Martin were involved, but I'm afraid from what I'm hearing from the field staff is that since the Harper government, there have been some cuts to not only science, but to enforcement that are contributing to some of the problems that we're seeing today.
Je vais remettre ma traduction. Merci, Monsieur Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Barry, I would also like to hear you, and Mr. Williams also, if you wish, on the role of fisheries agents, officers, and the needs that are being felt. We're talking about the situation in Nova Scotia, but it could be the same anywhere, whether it's in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada.
If I could, thank you for the question. I think Mr. Morrissey brought it up earlier that over the years, DFO has had their budget cut drastically, and at times they have very little presence on the water. Their working platforms are old, antiquated boats. Look, there needs to be a cash infusion, a huge cash infusion on the CMP side in DFO. Because they do not have the tools to do the job that is asked of them. Lack of equipment, lack of officers, and that there needs to be some budgetary changes here, and certainly DFO CMP needs to be
Monsieur le Président, j'ai totalement
Mr. Chair, I completely forgot how many minutes I still have. I don't know if I still have any seconds left.
Minutes, if you want to try and get a quick question in.
Peut-être, oui.
Yes, for Mr. Williams, I would like to know, because I heard Mr. Williams maybe suggesting that we would need less fisheries officers and that people should resolve things between themselves. I was wondering if that's what he said and if he could explain his position, his thoughts on that.
Fisheries, CMP coverage, fisheries officers are important, but they're not the solution to the problems we're dealing with today. We have to move forward on negotiations to resolve the questions around moderate livelihood and to establish a basis on which harvesters in the First Nations and non-First Nations communities can start working together to develop successful fisheries. So I think, yes, CMP is a part of this picture, but the real priority has to be on moving forward quickly and effectively with negotiation of a new treaty on Aboriginal fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you, Madam Gill. I do apologize for the mix-up in translation for our witness. I did allow for extra time to capture back that was being lost. I hope I was fair on that. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your really important testimony today. I'm going to start back in December 1999. This committee presented a report on the Marshall decision and its implications for management of Atlantic fisheries. The report found that DFO was caught off guard and didn't have a contingency plan, knowing that the Mi'kmaq fishers would be on the water and threatened by commercial fishers. Here we are in 2020. The Mi'kmaq fishers have been threatened, intimidated, traps have been cut, a building's been burned down. In the last 21 years, do you get the impression that DFO's developed a plan to keep the Mi'kmaq fishers safe when they're on the water, or do you feel DFO's been caught off guard again? And maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Clark, because you talked about DFO staff, not even having gas in their tanks and the cuts. Do you feel that they're adequately resourced to protect those fishers from their boats being rammed, from the confrontation that's taking place on the water where they're exercising their right, their treaty and constitutionally protected right?
I think there are two particular issues with the problem. First of all, I wouldn't even try to comment on present day realities, but from what I'm hearing from some of my colleagues who are still with the department, that's why I recommended that the standing committee should listen to them in the field today, not advice from a has-been that was there 20 years ago talking about what problems I had. I've talked to the officers now, and there's a lot of frustration within the field staff. I've talked to one recent supervisor. You probably have heard of him, Gary Hutchins from Matagan, the area that was the complex in St. Mary's Bay. He took early retirement because him and his staff were told through the chain of command to stand down their enforcement activities in St. Mary's Bay after the minister made her announcement on September the 17th. And I think it would be appropriate for this committee to talk to fishery officers in the field now. And I mean in the field. I don't mean the Director General in Ottawa or the Regional Director in Halifax. They're part of the problem, in my opinion. When I was in fisheries, the chain of command was very clear. You had to progress from a fishery officer to a supervisor, to a detachment supervisor, to an area chief, to a regional director, and then to the Director General of CMP.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. Mr. Williams, you talked about, and I really appreciate that, that's the economic benefit. It's a Beganagadi. We know it's the second largest Mi'kmaq community in Nova Scotia, and the community has been affected by centralization, oppression under the Indian Act, and the intergenerational effects of the residential school. And that basically, given these colonial oppressions that have suppressed their people from entering the middle class society of Canada, do you support that they must determine themselves what a moderate livelihood is? And Mr. Williams, I do appreciate that you did articulate about the economic benefit and the growth in terms of Indigenous participation in the fishery. Can you also speak about what that economic impact has been also on the communities where they live?
The economic impact on the communities has been, in a few cases, huge in terms of employment. There are bands like Elsipogtog in New Brunswick, where they've got almost 80 fishing boats fishing in the crab and lobster fisheries, and 300 people earning more than moderate livelihoods as active fishermen. There are other communities where, for one reason or another, those kinds of employment opportunities and engagement as harvesters on the water haven't taken place. I think Sebeganakati is one instance, but several other First Nations in Nova Scotia have followed different paths to pursuing their objectives. I think it would be, I hesitate to pass judgment on the choices made by any particular First Nations, but I think it is wise at this stage for people in your position and my position to stand back and wait for clear and constructive leadership to develop and directions to emerge across the collectivity of First Nations in Nova Scotia and in the Maritimes. I think
so you believe that you believe that this committee shouldn't be undermining any discussions that the nation's having currently on a nation-to-nation basis with Canada.
No, I don't believe. I think we should be accelerating and supporting moving forward as quickly as possible. I worry about, the most militant voices in some instances calling the shots. I think wiser heads really need to prevail in this situation without passing judgment on.
Really appreciate it. I know my time's running close, so I have to get another question, so I apologize. Mr. Barry, you talked about equality. Before Marshall, the Mi'kmaq weren't included in conversations about access to fisheries. Given that there was no equal access for generations, what does equality look like to you, and now that they're exercising their constitutionally and treaty protected right?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Jones. Listen, it's going to take a while. It's taken 21 years to get to this point to get First Nations involved into the commercial fishery through the Marshall Initiative, and some other programs. moving forward, I think there will be the First Nations will get more access, but there's a couple of nuances there. There only can be one regulator here. What you said was you pointed out earlier about St. Mary's Bay and the Shubenacadie Band. That fishery is not recognized. The DFO, the minister, did not issue those licenses. That is not an authorized fishery as of yet. There's got to be negotiations ongoing to determine what that type of fishery looks like. And at this point, I don't think the industry and I can't see how you can have two, in this case, two regulators. Other First Nations wants to regulate their own fishery also. That simply isn't going to work because you got 35 First Nations in Atlantic Canada. Everybody's going to want to, at some point, try to regulate their own fishery. That's not going to work. You must have one regulator, one set of regulations concerning conservation and stuff like this.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. We're gone way over time. We'll now go to Mr. Williamson for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Often in growing up, my name was mistaken for Williams. So every time I hear Mr. Williams' name being called, I jump here. So I'm glad you got it right, sir. Thank you. A couple questions. I think I'll start with Mr. Williams as well, from Mr. Williamson. You mentioned as you were giving some of these figures on the growth of Indigenous fisheries, and the minister has alluded to this as well by talking to how the catch from the Marshall decisions to today, or the landings, I should say, have grown from about $3 million to $120 million. So we do see increased activity, which obviously would bring about increased economic opportunity and some level of prosperity. You mentioned in a line that there would be an impact on the non-Indigenous fishing community, fishing families, by the changes that are being contemplated. Could you maybe talk to us about what you think some of those impacts are going to be? Because I think you were suggesting they would not all be positive.
Fisheries management today within a conservation regime is a zero-sum game. If new entrants come into the industry, if new fishing effort is brought into the industry, then effort has to be taken out, and maybe people are going to have to be taken out somewhere else. A lot of the anxiety and the reaction you're seeing happening at the community level right now is that there is no clear direction on that. There's no clear policy or understanding of how that's going to be managed. If we're going to maintain conservation and bring a whole new set of actors into the industry, what is the process for that to take place? In 1999, in the initial Marshall process, the process was that licenses were purchased from retiring harvesters and transferred into First Nations communities. So people understood, as things settled out, how that was going to happen and how the net effect was going to be neutral or beneficial. In the current environment, there's no clear direction or understanding about how a great deal of rumor and concern about an aggressively expanding new fishery and no understanding at all about how that's going to take place without severe impacts on people who are sort of caught in the backwash from that. So that's the lack of current kind of policy and direction that I think needs to be addressed as a priority.
Right. I think you're potentially right about that. I tried to get some answers from the minister last night on managing the change that the DFO is considering. Do you have any recommendations on how that should happen? Because when you use terms like people are going to have to be taken out, that suggests it's pretty dark. It's a pretty you can understand why people are concerned about these decisions and when they're getting so little information from the minister and DFO. Oh, you might be on mute, sir.
What's missing is a coherent approach. We need to move forward on 3 different initiatives. One is moving forward with negotiations on moderate livelihood and a new treaty. The second one is creating a structure where non-native industry stakeholders are part of that process, have a way to be at a certain table. They're not part of the nation-to-nation negotiation, but they have to be feeding into it. And the third thing is that we need to create structures where non-native and native harvesting leaders are working together to answer the kind of questions you're raising about, okay, how would we work together in this new environment? How would we manage transition in this new environment? So though it's not enough to just push forward on the negotiations, and it's certainly not enough to just put more fisheries officers on the water. We need a comprehensive, clear, fast track approach on all 3 levels.
Yeah. So do you think the Government of Canada, DFO, the Crown Indigenous Relations, one of these entities should be involved negotiating what a moderate livelihood means? Is that subject to negotiation, do you think?
20
well,
seconds.
it has to be negotiated. I mean, that's the great lack of clarity in the Marshall decision as to what that means in practical terms. People in the commercial industry would greatly prefer to see First Nations pursue moderate livelihoods through integrating into the commercial fishery rather than creating a separate siloed, self-managed fishery.
Thank
But
you.
that's what has to be resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start with Mr. William. Mr. William, if I'm not mistaken, I think you wrote a book. It's called The Future for the Fishery, I think. Crisis and Renewal in Canada and Elected Fishing Industry. Is that right?
That's correct. Thank you for the plug.
Good. So how do you see the future of the fisheries in, let's say, Atlantic Canada, but also in Canada, like what's going on right now, but in what past 7 that happened in last couple of decades? Like how can we make sure that the fishery that we have in Canada is not only sustainable, but is there for the younger generation, the First Nation, for everybody that live in this country?
The fishing industry today is booming. There's every reason to believe that we can sustain that dramatic growth into the future. We are managing most of our commercial fish stocks now on a sustainable basis. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned in my introduction, the biggest challenge in many ways is going to be finding the people to keep this industry going in its current structure. You just passed a new Fisheries Act that clearly identifies a policy objective, which is to retain ownership and control of access rights within communities and within the harvesting sector. And so the really interesting question for me now is how, to the extent that the expansion and development of Indigenous fisheries is going to help meet some of our human resources needs and re-people our fishing communities, how do we ensure that it all happens within a framework of a community-based, independent, owner-operator-driven fishery?
Okay, good. You're talking about managing the resources and managing the fishery. We've talked a lot about the conservation, aspect of this whole situation that we are in, like commercial fishermen, First Nation community are talking about the importance of conservation. If we talk about lobster, we all know that lobster, there's no dockside monitoring, like we have an approximative of what the resources looks like. What is your thought on having a dockside monitoring in lobster fishery?
I think we are moving gradually. We were slowed down now by the pandemic, but I think we are moving towards full monitoring and coverage in the lobster fishery. Electronic monitoring on small vessels may be a big part of that solution rather than observers, and dockside monitoring is clearly going to be part. And that's part of the infrastructure that will make it easier to integrate First Nations into the community. I agree with Bernie on the need to have an integrated system where everything is coming through the same monitoring and process.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Your thoughts on the managing aspect and the resources of, maybe having a better control over the resources of lobster dockside monitoring, and maybe, getting better price for it, getting, better demand on the market for the lobster if we control our amount of lobster is in the market, because as we all know, the lobster are flooding the market right now. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Cormier. I don't think at this point we do not need dockside monitoring. We've got enough things in place like log books and checks and balances. Even from a provincial standpoint, there's some checks and balances there with the buyers, how much product they're buying. So we've got a good idea how much lobsters are coming ashore. And as far as, there's a lot of lobsters, but we've got facilities now that can hold hundreds of thousands of pounds of lobsters and basically play to the market as the market needs them and stuff like that. It's not like we're landing all our lobsters today and we have to get rid of them today. These facilities will allow us to hold lobsters for 4, 5, 6 months, and gradually, and again, and that also helps us get a better price. You're not flooding the market at any one point and stuff like that. So I think, at least at this point, I think a dockside monitoring program is simply not needed in the lobster fishery.
Okay, thank you. I think my time is up, Mr. Chair, right?
There's only a few seconds left.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. About the same topic, I know that in the Côte-Nord, First Nations communities would like to see Aboriginal fisheries officers. Mr. Barry or Williams or Clark, do you think that it should be part of the solution, even though there are other factors that take into account? Do you think that it would help to have Aboriginal fisheries officers?
Madam Gill, having Aboriginal fishery officers is a good idea. The key is that they're enforcing the same one regulatory regime. Again, I know it sounds redundant, but you only can have one regulatory regime. Thank you.
Madame Gill?
Yes, the other witnesses can answer. Sorry, it takes more time with interpretation. So I have another question. And no, I don't think that Mr. Barry sounds like a broken record. So in terms of decentralizing, Mr. Clark, you were saying that you would like to see more workforce on the field. Do you think that the operations of the department are too centralized? And do you think that it would be beneficial for communities to have more decentralization?
I think it's long overdue that Department of Fisheries has a direct line reporting similar to the RCMP. I don't believe that you should be hiring director generals supervising conservation and protection and enforcement in Ottawa, or regional directors in Halifax who have never been trained as a fishery officer, who have never done fishery officer duties, who are bureaucrats who don't know the people they're directing, how they're trained or how they should function in potentially very dangerous situations. I think there should be direct line reporting from the area, perhaps to the regional director, but direct line similar to what the commissioner is in the RCMP. And I've made this argument many times. How would we react as a citizen if the commissioner of the RCMP had never been trained as a recruit at RCMP Depot or had never progressed up the chain of command, and all of a sudden they were put in charge of the whole organization? What would we expect any police force in any major city to have a police chief who is a bureaucrat and who has never been trained as a police officer supervising a city police department.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clark. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank again the witnesses for their important testimony today. Several non-Indigenous fishers associations have appeared at this committee and talked about tensions and the lack of communication and the desire for everyone to be on the same page when it comes to operations. Mr. Barry, maybe you can speak about the outreach efforts and work that your association has done in order to bridge that communications gap between your fishers and Indigenous fishers, and also maybe about education, about the understanding of the treaty and constitutionally protected rights of those communities.
Thank you, Mr. Johns, for the question. Actually, we were engaged. I'm going to have the time frame a little bit wrong, but we were engaged in dialogue with First Nations from the local area, Southwest Nova, about 2 years ago for about a year, trying to talk this through. It was very, very slow going. But we didn't come out of it with any agreements or anything like this, but we were talking. And then that table kind of elevated to other First Nations in Nova Scotia with, for example, Chief Terry Paul was there. We were having conversations with them and KMKNO for maybe 6 months to 8 months. And again, very slow moving. And then we're not sure what happened. It just seemed to fall off the rails, and we haven't got back together like we.
Do you feel it's the
no
role
back
of the?
and forth.
Do you think it's the role of the federal government to initiate and foster that community building that's required to build the trust between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishers?
I think, Mr. Johns, it could help. Again, listen, I think at some point the Indigenous and non-Indigenous have to reach out to one another also. Certainly DFO has a part to play, but look, at some point we have to get to a point where we can all talk about how we move forward with this and be at the same table. Maybe not, I'm not talking about a rights table, but when it comes to things about the fishery,
Your communications,
the communications, we simply have to be there to put our views forward and have them fully vetted. And listen, will there be disagreement? Absolutely. But you just can't ignore the fishing industry or any other industry when it comes to this kind of these kind of talks when you're, maybe changing the landscape on what or how a fishery or an industry is looked.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. 2.5 minutes don't be going long when you're having fun. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't aware I was up. So, first of all, just give me 2 seconds to grab my notes here. Mr. Clark, how does the enforcement branch determine what level of enforcement to apply into a situation over the years? Was the direction ever received from higher ups or from the minister's office?
I can only speak to my own situation prior to my retirement, but we completed at the time something that was called an Integrated Fisheries Management Plan that included conservation and protection and enforcement as part of the model. And it was run primarily by the areas. I mean, just to give you some of my own experiences, I've had disagreements in the past from some of my masters in regional headquarters who had a different idea of how enforcement should have been conducted. And at one time I asked them, I said, if you don't agree with what we're doing, please put it in writing. I want your direction in writing. And unless I get it in writing, I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing. I've never received it in writing. And if I had received something that I disagreed with or thought was illegal or immoral, I would have resigned and I would have made it widely known why I was resigning.
And you recently or referred to a recent resignation, I believe you said by a Mr. Hutchins, that because they were basically told to stand down on the enforcement after the minister made her announcement. Can you elaborate further on that?
That's my understanding. I wouldn't call it a resignation. I would call it an opting for early retirement because he was frustrated with the decisions that were being made for him to stand down his unit in St. Mary's Bay.
Pardon me, I didn't mean to use the term resigned. I meant to use the term retired. So thank you for clarifying on that. Mr. Barry, we've repeatedly asked the minister if she was open to the idea of having two separate fisheries, and yet she seems to deny that that's a possibility, but also says that she can't speak about what is being negotiated. So it leads us to wondering if that is what's being negotiated. Can you outline to the committee whether this is something commercial fishers have asked for, or if they think it would be helpful?
Thank you. Mr. Allen, you're talking about having the one regulatory regime. Listen, I know we've had numerous talks with the minister over the last, over the last 3 months. We maybe had 5 or 6 calls, and at every call, that is one of the linchpins that is always talked about. One regulatory system. There only can be one regulator, meaning DFO, and the minister has certainly the power and the wherewithal to issue licenses and do whatever else. 2 regulatory regimes or 3 is simply a non-starter for the industry. It has to be one regulator, period.
And you were indicated earlier that you didn't feel that dockside monitoring was necessary. Can you elaborate on how the catch is accounted for, basically, either at the vessel level or the purchasing or selling level, both within the Indigenous and non-Indigenous fisheries?
Well, at least in the commercial season, it's the same. Every commercial fisherman, whether it's a communal commercial license or a commercial license, has to fill out a daily logbook, and then logbooks have to be turned in once a month, and the data is entered, and so on and so forth. And like I pointed out, also on the provincial side, the provincial side also requires a certain percentage of the lobster buyers to give them how much product they've bought, where, when, and stuff like that. It's not 100% coverage, but they do have to enter some stuff.
And do both Indigenous and non-Indigenous report the same way? In
the commercial season, yes.
In the non-commercial season?
This, I don't know if there's, again, we don't agree with this. There's no accountability here. Certainly, I don't think DFO is involved in the monitoring of the catch rates. And so this creates, like I pointed out earlier, a big problem. There's no accountability for what's coming out of the water.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Batiste for 5 minutes or less, please.
Yes, I'd like to start off my questions with Mr. Barry. I'm wondering about how many different lobster associations and unions there are in Nova Scotia.
Geez, Mr. Batista, I'm not sure. There's numerous organizations, and again, if I give you a guess, it's just an approximate. So I simply don't know. 15, 20 possibly. Some of them are multi-species associations. Some are just lobster associations. So I simply don't know the number.
And what is the mandate of these? Of the associations for lobsters and fisheries?
Well, really, just to be accountable to members, try to provide the members with information and maybe take forth some ideas. Try to engage in science and stuff like this. Depending on the availability of money and stuff like this, especially on the science side.
Okay. How many Mi'kmaq members are there in these associations?
I'm not sure. I know our
Can you name any?
associations. Yeah, well, our association has, I think, 7 or 8. Well, the from the Nova Scotia Native Council. They're part of the
Native Council. Okay.
Yeah.
So what is it that you talked about the good relationship that was determined between Acadia and places like Bear River? I'm wondering what are they doing well in terms of communicating with Fisheries Association that Sipinagati isn't doing well?
I'm not sure, Mr. Batiste, if it's communication. I just think it's the level of activity that's taken place. Certainly, what's happened up in St. Mary's Bay, particularly with Shubenacadie, is a large amount of product and pots in the water, large amount of product being taken out. The other 2 First Nations that you speak of, they are fishing, certainly out of season, but the level of removal is nowhere near what Shubenacadie is taking. That still doesn't make it right. There should be, in our view, unless you have a license from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, there should be no removal in the out of season.
So you said there's several associations and there's several different kind of unions that are talking about the fisheries, but you say there can be only one regulatory regime. Can you give me your opinion on why there can be only one regulatory regime? Is this a legal thing or is this an economic thing? Tell me about this.
I just think for the continuity of the fishery. I mean, saying I'll just look at Southwest Nova. I mean, you have seasons, you have pot limits, you have certain conservation tools that's being used, whether it be escape hatches, size limits, so on and so forth. And it's all being run, like I said, by DFO. The continuity is there.
It's what you're used to, correct?
Well, not used. Well, yes, used to, because it's been in place, but you just cannot. I believe, Mr. Batiste, have 2 or 3 or 4 or even 2 different regulatory regimes. I mean, this is a tried and true regulatory regimes. And sometimes we disagree with it too, but this has been developed over 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Is it perfect? Probably not. Everybody's still trying to improve on it, but I don't think you improve on it by just all of a sudden starting another regulatory regime.
Mm-hmm. Even if it was transparent and that all of the regimes were transparent, do you think that that would still be unacceptable to fishermen?
I think so. My opinion is, Mr. Batiste, it would be unacceptable. I think you have to have, look, I mean, there's one law, if I could put it.
But there's 3 laws in Canada. There's Indigenous laws, there's the French civil law, there's the English common law. There's a wide variety of legal pluralism in Canada. I'm wondering why that can't exist within the fisheries.
Well, actually, Mr. Batiste, I'm not a lawyer like yourself, but still the one regulatory regime in this industry works best. I think it would just add to confusion and stuff like this. And again, I don't know why another regulatory regime would want to actually be developed unless you're going to make massive changes. What is wrong with the existing regulatory regime?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Batiste. Your time has expired. That brings us pretty well to the close of the, I guess, the public session with witnesses before we do a little bit of committee business to clue up.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, do we not have enough time for another quick round?
No, Mr. Johns, we actually don't.
We can have one question each. Would that be possible?
No, Mr. Johns, we don't. I got to get this information done and looked after during this committee meeting, and I can't let it, and we are not permitted to go over time today because of the other committees. But I will say thank you to our witnesses for enlightening us with your knowledge here this evening, and we'll let them leave the meeting now while we go into committee business. I won't be suspending. Oh. Okay, just waiting for Mr. Clark to disappear. Are the witnesses gone, Nancy? Okay. Just a couple of things, I guess, to for the upcoming meetings is what I need to discuss about. But first off, I will say that, as everybody knows, Monday, November 30th is our normal committee meeting, but it falls into the timeline that's up against the fall economic statement by the Justice Minister. Now, it's but Finance Minister, I'm sorry, Justice Minister don't do the economic update. But and some members have mentioned to me that they would like to be able to attend it or be a part of it or watch it. If we do that, it's right in our committee time. So we either have to decide, one, are we going ahead with committee on Monday, November 30th, or are we going to just cancel that meeting? I'm open to suggestions. I'll go with whatever the majority suggests that we should do. So any comment?
Well, this is Mr. Williamson.
Yes, Mr. Williamson.
I think we should proceed with the meeting, certainly in light of the concerns from our last meeting, where many committee members are urging the committee to move on to its next study. I would like to have some more time on the current one. So if time is of the essence, let's take advantage of every second of it. I think this is an economic update. It's not a budget, which normally has everyone in the house. So, and if people feel strongly about it, they could always sub out and go to the other event instead, should they choose to do so. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak to it?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Williamson. If somebody wants to follow the economic statement, then they could sub out. We want to wrap this up. We've been hearing very good testimony from witnesses, and we do have to move on to the salmon one.
Okay, Mr. Johns, you had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Is there any chance we can schedule the FOPO meeting a little bit later? That way we get a chance to hear the opening. At least it's 4 o'clock. A lot of us are carrying many critic files, and so it's important to be present at least, or
okay.
at least.
Okay. Well, I'll ask Nancy what the schedule looks like on Monday, Mr. Johns. She'd probably be able to give us some information on that. You're on mute, Nancy.
Non, je suis là. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
No, I'm there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the calendar. If I'm not mistaken, after the Monday meeting, there's Canada, China, and another committee meeting after us. So when there's a vote, we can push back, and the other ones will start later. However, for something other than votes, I think that the agreement is that we have to leave the space for the other committees, but I could check.
We're with everyone then.
Okay, so hearing nothing else, we'll say that committee will go ahead on Monday as per normal. Okay, good.
I saw Miss Gill had her hand up in the side in the participant line. I'm not sure what's gone now, but no, it is up again.
Oui, je l'avais.
Madame Gill.
Merci.
Yes, indeed. I wanted to say something, but the solution is what I was wishing for. That's why I raised a hand. But I also wanted to know if I could raise my hand there on the side. Otherwise, I'll raise it on the screen with my own hand if it's better for you, Mr. Chair.
Me, it just I didn't have the participants up at that particular time, but I do now. Thank you for that. So we'll go with the meeting on Monday. Okay, good. We got that straightened out. In the restarting of the Pacific salmon, we need to establish how many more meetings we need to have with witnesses. Of course, as I mentioned 2 days ago, the House calendar ends on December 11th with regards to our committee. Therefore, that only leaves us Monday's meeting, which is November 30th. We then have Wednesday, December 2nd, Monday, December 7th, and Wednesday, December 9th. So we actually have 4 meetings. So we need to know if we want one more full meeting to do the finish up the witnesses and the moderate livelihood. It's done, one more meeting for that. So we'll do that on Monday the 30th if we can get witnesses to agree to come. And then we've got 3 meetings left. Now remember, we're going to do our drafting instructions and for the moderate livelihood study, or will we just go into salmon for the last 3 meetings? Okay, seeing no comment, I guess we'll leave it up to the chair to decide and notify you accordingly as to what we'll do. Okay, I see people actually nodding to that and thumbs up. Okay, I'm in charge. Wonderful. Okay, so I'll discuss with the clerk on that. And as well, we need, if we're going to start the Pacific salmon study, we need to set a deadline for witnesses for that particular study. So I believe Nancy has issued around a outline of witnesses and whatnot for the Pacific salmon big bear study. So have everybody got their copy of that? Yeah, but we got to know when we're starting. We got to know when to start. So if we start either Wednesday the 2nd or Monday the 7th, if we wait to Monday the 7th, Wednesday the 2nd, we could deal with cluing up the drafting instructions. No, okay. All right, that's done there on Monday. All right, we'll start witnesses for Wednesday, December 2nd. So we need a deadline, a very quick deadline, in order to get those witnesses presented to the clerk. So what about if I said 5 p.m. Eastern time on Friday this week, 27th? So everybody's okay with that? For the finish up of witnesses for the Pacific salmon, Friday, November 27th. Other than this, is there any other business anybody wanted to raise? I didn't think this was going to go as quickly and as smoothly. So hearing nothing, I will, Madam Gill.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm having a hard time following because there's obviously a few seconds between what you say and the interpreter. Did you hear the motion? Because I have the one on seal, because I would be ready to file to submit it. Can I do it now? That was your question?
I would presume it's in both official languages as...
Yes, absolutely. It was sent to the clerk. It was sent in both official languages, yes.
Yes, the last meeting we held, we discussed, because Mr. Morrissey has a motion very similar. I don't know if the two of you have talked. I see both of you nodding your heads, so I guess both of you did.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yep, I agree with the motion that Madame Gill was about to move.
Okay, go ahead, Madame Gill.
That the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans undertake a comprehensive study of seals that would examine the ecosystem impacts of seal overpopulation in the waters of Quebec, Eastern and Western Canada, international experience in seal stock management, the domestic and international market potential for various seal products, social acceptability, and the social cultural importance of developing the seal hunt for coastal and First Nations communities with access to the resource, and that the committee strongly consider travel to countries such as Scotland, Norway, and Iceland, either virtually or physically, which acted to conserve fish stocks as a result of seal population.
Bill, we've all heard the motion. Any discussion? Not seeing any. I guess Nancy will call for the vote.
So the vote is on the motion from Ms. Gill. Mr. Baptiste?
I vote in favor.
Mr. Beach?
I vote in favor.
Monsieur Cormier?
Je vote pour.
Miss Zana?
Je vote en faveur.
Mr. Morrissey?
En favor.
Mr. Arnold?
I vote in favor.
Mr. Bragdon?
Je vote pour.
Mr. Zimmer?
In favor. I vote in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Williamson?
Vote yes.
Madame Gill?
Je vote pour.
Mr. Johns?
I vote for.
All yeas, Mr. Chair. Tuesday week.
Thank you, Nancy. Passed unanimously. Excellent. So, again, I'll say Monday is the last meeting on moderate livelihood, and hopefully we'll have time at the end of the meeting to do drafting instructions. Then the next three meetings, December 2nd, December 7th, and December 9th, we'll dedicate to Pacific salmon. And maybe on the Wednesday, December 9th, we may also have an opportunity to do drafting instructions for that study to get that, give the clerks something to do over the Christmas recess, I guess you call it. I'm sure that's just what they're looking forward to. But hearing other new business, hearing none, I now call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
See everybody.